Hey there, welcome to the Dozy Historian. If you love stories from the past told in a calm and cozy way, you're in the right place.
Mysterious moments that shaped our world. From ancient civilizations to modern revolutions, every episode brings you a fresh, cinematic journey through time. Asterisk, the prairie wind that carried an ancient voiced wind found the house before anyone else did. On most evenings, the tallgrass prairie lay quiet beneath the wide Nebraska sky, the blades of big bluestem and switchgrass swaying in slow, sleepy rhythms. But on this particular night in 1873, the wind came early, slipping over the open land with the softness of a lullaby and the intent of a visitor. Inside the small sod house, a lantern glowed on the rough-hewn table. Its warm light brushed over the faces of the Carter family, tinting them gold. Supper was finished. The tin plates were stacked. Outside, the last strands of daylight faded into deep blue. 11-year-old Emma Carter sat by the narrow window, her chin resting on her knees, watching the prairie darken. Her little brother, Jacob, had fallen asleep on a pile of quilts, his small fingers still curled as if gripping an invisible toy. Their mother, Sarah, stitched silently near the lantern, her needle catching the light with each careful movement. Their father, Thomas, sat by the door, boots off, eyes half closed, listening to the quiet. It was the quiet that made the prairie feel so large, the kind of quiet that seemed to go on forever, as if the sky were not up above but all around them. Tonight, however, the quiet did not stay empty. Emma noticed at first the way the tall grass outside leaned all at once, as though a hand had brushed over it. A low sigh rolled across the land, not loud, not forceful, just distinct. It threaded through the sod walls and slipped through the cracks around the door, bringing with it the cool scent of earth and dry sun-warmed stalks. Her eyes lifted, and she drew her knees closer to her chest. "Pa," she said softly, "the wind's coming." Thomas opened his eyes and listened. It wasn't the restless kind of wind that signaled a storm, nor the sharp, whistling wind that bit at the ears in winter. This wind was rounder somehow, a softer breath, more like someone exhaling slowly after a long story. He heard it move across the roof, rustling the bundles of grass, then curl down around the corners of the house. The lantern flame flickered, then steadied. "It's just the land settling for the night," Thomas said, voice gentle, as much for himself as for his daughter. Nothing to fret over. But the wind, as if mildly amused, chose that moment to rise again just enough to be heard. It slid along the tall grass, the stalks rubbing together in long, waving swishes that almost sounded like words. Emma's heart gave a small, curious thump. She leaned closer to the window, pressing her ear near the narrow edge where a thin line of night peered in. "Ma," she whispered. "Do you hear that?" Sarah paused her stitching, needle suspended. She listened, her eyes turning toward the window too. The prairie brushed and sighed. Outside, in that great ocean of grass, something moved like music too far away to quite make out. "It's just the wind, dear," her mother said, but her voice had softened. The prairie's always talking in its own way. Emma thought about that, about a land big enough to have a voice, about the way the grass bent, like waves in the sea she had never seen. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. Swish, hush, swish. Hush like the breathing of some ancient, sleeping thing. Something about it felt kind. Not like a warning, not like a cry. Just a low, soothing murmur like a song sung through cupped hands. She stayed by the window until her eyelids grew heavy. The wind continued until late in the night, a soft, steady whispering that wove through her dreams and left the vague impression of a melody. She almost understood. It was the first night Emma ever thought the wind might be trying to say something. In the morning, the world was still again. The prairie stretched in every direction under a pale, early sun. Dew clung to the grass like beads of glass, and a few meadowlarks called from somewhere unseen. Thomas stepped outside, pulling his suspenders over his shoulders, and drew in a deep breath of cool air. Behind him, the sod house felt small compared to the sky, but small did not mean weak. Its thick earthen walls held in warmth and pushed back against the emptiness. It was, in its own humble way, a kind of anchor against the endlessness of the plains. Emma came out after him, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "Pa," she said, squinting into the light, "do you think the wind can remember things?" He glanced down at her, one eyebrow raised. "Remember?" "Yes." She kicked lightly at a tuft of grass. "You said it's always moving over the land, always been here, long before us. So maybe it remembers all the people who lived here before we came. Maybe it remembers what they said." Thomas studied her for a moment. "You've been thinking hard this morning." She shrugged, but her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. The grass moved gently, as if nodding along to some secret understanding. Somewhere out there, wildflowers that no one had planted bloomed and faded according to a rhythm older than fences, older than towns, older than her questions. "Well," Thomas said at last, looking out across the open expanse, "I reckon if anything could remember, it'd be this land. And if anything could carry those memories, it'd be the wind." His answer settled around them like an invisible blanket. Emma smiled faintly. "So maybe that's what we heard last night," she said. "The wind remembering." The whispers did not come every night. Some evenings the prairie lay still, and the only sounds were crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. On other nights, stronger winds rushed across the plains, twisting and pulling at the grass with busy, impatient hands. Those nights the sound was restless, chopper nothing like the smooth, murmuring tones Emma had heard. But every so often, when the air cooled just right and the sky turned a particular shade of soft navy, the melodic whisper returned. Emma came to recognize those evenings. She would feel them before the sun even dipped low. The air would take on a slight hush. The light would turn more golden, stretching shadows longer, as if the world itself were preparing to listen. On those nights, she would sit again by the window, and Sarah would set her stitching aside. And even Thomas, after a long day in the fields, would lean back in his chair, eyes turned toward the quiet door. They never spoke much while it happened. There didn't seem to be a need. The whispering wind flowed through the tall grass, over the sod roof, around the corners of their little home. It was like hearing a long, slow story told in a language they did not know but whose emotion they somehow understood. Peace, patience, oldness. That's what Emma felt most of all, the sense of something old. Sometimes Jacob, roused halfway from sleep, would mumble, "What's it saying?" And Emma would smile and brush her brother's hair from his eyes. Something gentle, she'd answer. Something that isn't about us, but lets us listen anyway. As weeks turned into months, the homesteaders scattered across the plains began to share stories. One day in town, while Thomas traded for supplies, Emma lingered near the open door of the small general store. Outside, 3 men stood by their wagons, speaking in low voices. She recognized one of them, Mr. Hensley, whose farm lay a half-day's ride to the south. "Telling you, it's like singing," Mr. Hensley was saying, rubbing the back of his neck. "Heard it myself. No storm, no thunder, just that soft sound. Wife thought it was in her head, but the children heard it too." The man beside him frowned. "Singing? Out there? You've been working too hard in that sun?" Hensley. "I know what I heard," Hensley insisted. "Not an English song, neither. Just a hum, like voices far away and all together." Emma's heart gave a gentle, excited leap. Another man older, with a grey beard and deep lines at the corners of his eyes, leaned on his wagon wheel. "The Lakota spoke of such things," he said, "and the Omaha, too. The wind carries stories. Some say it holds the voices of those who walked the land before us. Maybe you've just finally learned to listen." The skeptical man gave a short laugh. "Superstitions." The older man shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe not. Man doesn't know half as much as he thinks, especially out here. You stand in a field of grass taller than your horse and tell me you don't feel small. Something was here first. Something will be here after." Emma slipped back inside the store, her mind turning. The idea that others heard it too, that the whispering was not just the special secret of her own family's sod house, felt strangely comforting. The prairie, enormous as it was, seemed suddenly connected, as if invisible threads of sound tied many small homes together. That night, When the whisper returned, Emma pressed her hand against the wall and imagined the wind flowing past other homesteads, other windows, other children listening in the dark with their hearts open. One quiet afternoon, a visitor came to their door. Emma heard the horse first, hooves muffled by the thick grass. She stepped out, shading her eyes. A rider approached at a measured pace, not hurried, not slow. As he drew closer, she saw the worn but careful clothing, the braided hair, the calm, steady posture. Sarah stepped outside beside her daughter, wiping her hands on her apron. Thomas came from the field, setting his tools aside. The man dismounted with an easy, practiced grace. His face bore the calm of someone who had seen much and carried it lightly. "Good day," Thomas said, though his voice held a note of caution. "What can we do for you?" The man looked out over the prairie, then back to them. "The wind has been speaking," he said. His English was careful but clear. "Some of your people grow afraid. Others grow curious. I thought perhaps the story might ease their hearts." Emma's own heart fluttered. Sarah inclined her head. "Would you like to come in, sir? We have water and some bread left from noon." The man gave a small, polite nod. "I would be grateful." Inside, the sod house felt a little more crowded, but not uncomfortably so. The man sat where Thomas sat, near the door. His eyes moved around the room, not judging, simply noting. The lantern, the quilts, the shelf with a single worn book and a folded Bible. "My name is Wakasa," he said. "My people have walked this land longer than your people have known it exists." "I'm Thomas," Thomas replied softly. "This is my wife, Sarah, and our children, Emma and Jacob." Emma couldn't look away. There was something about the way Wakasa's gaze lingered on the window, on the grass just outside, that made her think he could see farther than the rest of them somehow. "The wind," he said, after he had taken a sip of water, "is not a thing we fear. It is a thing we listen to." Sarah folded her hands in her lap. "We've been hearing something. At night, a sound, soft like singing, but not in any tongue we know." Wakasa nodded slowly. "You are not the only ones. We thought maybe it was." Thomas hesitated, searching for a word that did not sound foolish. "Just our imaginations. Your imaginations are not strong enough to move all the grass on the plains," Wakasa said gently, and his eyes crinkled a little, almost like he was smiling. "No, this land remembers. The wind is only its breath." Jacob, who had been quiet, tugged at Emma's sleeve. "Is it ghosts?" he whispered. Wakasa's ear caught the word. He turned to the boy. "Not as you think of ghosts," he said. "Not the frightening shapes from dark stories. These are like echoes. You shout into a canyon, and the sound comes back. So it is with lives lived upon this earth. The more lives, the deeper the echo." Emma thought of the older man in town who'd spoken of the Lakota and Omaha stories. She thought of the journal entries in her own mind, invisible but vivid, each night of whispering wind, each sense of someone speaking just out of understanding. "Can the wind carry voices from a long time ago?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Wakasa replied. "It carries the voices of those who sang to the buffalo, who prayed under these very skies, who walked trails that your maps do not draw. It carries the songs of my grandfathers and of theirs before them. Sometimes, when the night is still, those songs can be heard again, not because the past has returned, but because it was never entirely gone." His words settled into the small house like dust motes in a sunbeam, soft, slow and strangely beautiful. "Why do we hear it now?" Sarah asked. "We've only been here." "What, Thomas, a year?" "Almost," he replied. Wakasa looked out the window again, letting the silence stretch. "Because you are new," he said at last. "New things must learn the old songs of a place, or they will not stay long. The land is introducing itself to you, testing your listening, asking a question." "A question?" Emma echoed. "Yes." Wakasa's eyes met hers. "It asks, will you live here as if you are the first, or as if you are one among many who have loved this ground?" The room grew very quiet. Emma felt the words move through her like a slow, warm breeze. One among many. The idea that they were not starting something new, but joining something that had begun long before them, made the prairie feel less empty and more like company. The wind is not there to frighten you, Wakasa continued. It is there to remind you that you are not alone on this land. You have neighbors you cannot see, but whose stories still travel. He stood then, setting his cup carefully on the table. I must go, he said. There are others who need stories too. When the wind sings, listen. It is not a threat. It is a welcome. Thomas rose and offered his hand. Thank you, he said, and the words felt too small, but they were all he had. Wakasa clasped his hand firmly. Do not silence the land, he said gently. Let it speak to you. Let it lull you to sleep, not with fear, but with the comfort that many hearts once beat under this same sky. Then he stepped out into the sunshine, mounted his horse, and rode back into the vast field of tall grass, until he and his horse were just another soft movement in a sea of green. That night, the wind returned. It came after the last bit of light had drained from the west and the lantern had been turned low. Thomas and Sarah shared a look something between awe and gratitude while Jacob yawned, and burrowed deeper into his quilts. Emma went to the window, as she always did. But this time when the whispering began, when the grass rubbed and swayed and the sound came not quite voice, not quite song, she closed her eyes and simply listened. She imagined, as Wakasa had said, that the sound wasn't just the grass, but stories traveling, stories of children who had laughed on this land long before her, stories of mothers who had watched the same stars through different windows, stories of fathers who had stood in fields, hands on their hips, watching the sky for signs of rain. In her mind, the whispering became a lullaby sung by many voices at once, some deeper, some higher, some rough with age, some light with youth, not speaking words she knew, but carrying feelings she recognized. Hope, weariness, gratitude, love. The wind moved over the sod house, around it, through it. It touched the sleeping boy. It brushed the tired shoulders of the father. It moved across the mother's folded hands. It braided itself softly into the girl's dark hair. And in that moment, Emma did not feel like a stranger on the prairie anymore. She felt like someone arriving late to a gathering that had already begun, slipping quietly into an empty chair that had been saved for her. Time flowed the way it did on the plains, slower and faster all at once. Days were filled with work, planting, tending, mending, fetching, hauling. Nights were filled with quiet, with stars, with the small sounds of a family sharing the same walls and the same simple dreams. The whispering wind did not come every night. It came when it chose, but when it did, Emma would lie on her pallet and let the gentle, melodic sound wash over her. She noticed that, after Wakasa's visit, the whisper seemed sadder sometimes, not in a way that frightened her, but in a way that tugged softly at her heart, as if, somewhere in those faraway echoes, they were goodbyes. She wondered if the land was remembering people who had left, people who had been pushed away, people whose footsteps no longer pressed the soil, but whose songs still lingered in the air. When that sadness came, she would whisper back nothing grand, just small, quiet promises into her blanket. We hear you, she would breathe. We know you were here. We won't forget. The wind never answered in words. But once, on a clear night when the grass shimmered with starlight, the whisper eased into a tone so tender that Emma felt tears in her eyes. Though she could not say exactly why, she fell asleep with that sound wrapped around her like a soft shawl. Years later, when Emma was older, the sod house would be replaced with a wood frame home. New neighbors would move in. Fences would multiply. Roads would appear. Then telegraph lines, then more. The prairie would change. Some of the tall grass would be cut down, replaced by neat rows of crops. Some of the open horizon would be interrupted by buildings and barns. Life would grow busier, noisier. The distance between people's doors would shrink, even as the distance between their listening and the land sometimes widened. But even then, on certain nights, when the air cooled just right and the sky turned to that familiar shade of soft navy, Emma would stand on her new porch and feel it, the wind slipping over the fields, carrying it slow. Ancient murmur. She would close her eyes and hear the whisper that had sung her to sleep as a child. The same gentle rise and fall, the same sense of a story far bigger than her own. She would remember Wakasa's calm gaze, his steady voice. "The land is introducing itself to you." And she would whisper back. Now, as a grown woman who had seen births and burials, harvests and losses, I remember. "I know we are not the first. Thank you for letting us stay." The wind would move on, over her home, across the fields where wildflowers still insisted on blooming in corners no plough could quite reach. It would cradle other houses, other children with restless hearts and curious minds. It would pass through new towns that would forget to listen, and old souls who would remember how. The prairie would continue its gentle breathing. The wind would continue to carry its quiet, melodic whisper. And somewhere, in that long, low hum, the ancient voices would keep telling their endless, soothing story, a story of sky and grass and footsteps and love over and over again, until those who lay beneath the land and those who walked upon it were joined, for just a moment in the same peaceful, listening silence. On such nights, if you stood very still on the tallgrass plains, you might hear it to the softest hint of a song in the wind, too faint to frighten, too gentle to ignore, a whisper that does not ask to be solved or explained, only heard, a whisper that, if you let it, will rock you into sleep like a cradle made of earth and sky. The prairie met him long before he met it. Elias Carter had been riding for days, his horse weary, his coat heavy with dust. The world behind him was the string of old roads and towns where he had left more memories than he cared to count. He had set out toward the Nebraska plains because he wanted quiet, real quiet, the kind that came only when a man could hear nothing but his own breath and the soft footfall of his horse. But the land that stretched before him did not feel empty. It felt awake. The tallgrass rippled in smooth waves, like a sea without shore. The wind moved through it with a rhythm that was neither harsh nor careless, but deliberate, like a gentle hand brushing across a harp. Elias slowed his horse, one hand gripping the worn leather reins, and listened. There it was again, that low, murmuring sound. He frowned. He had heard wind in the Rockies, in the Dakotas, in the scattered plains of Kansas. But this was different. Not a whistle, not a howl, not even the busy rustle of grass in motion. This was softer, rounder, smoother, as though a voice were trailing just beneath the breeze, too faint to understand, too persistent to ignore. Something about it made the hair along his forearms prickle. He breathed in deeply, letting the scent of grass and earth fill his lungs. A new chapter of life should have felt simple, but the very air carried something that tugged at him, as if the land was not content to let him pass quietly. A cabin at the edge of nowhere by late afternoon. Elias reached the small patch of land he had claimed months earlier through letters and signatures. A modest wooden cabin, unfinished, but standing, waited near a cluster of cottonwoods. He dismounted slowly, stretching stiff limbs. The wind swept past him, brushing the tallgrass in long arcs. Again that murmur traveled with it, faint, like distant humming. "You've chosen a strange place to retire," he muttered to himself. But it was beautiful, and lonely in the exact way he wanted. He tied his horse near the trough, where the pump stood ready but unused. After a few minutes of pumping, fresh, cold water filled the bucket. He let the horse drink before splashing some over his own face. The grass behind him swayed again, not wildly, not storm-like, just in a smooth ripple that seemed to move intentionally toward him, then away again. He exhaled slowly. If it had been any other day, he would have blamed it on the wind. But after a week alone on the trail, he had become acutely aware of what normal wind sounded like. This wasn't quite that. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of new wood, dry earth, and the faintest hint of sage. The floorboards creaked as he walked, and the half-finished roof let slivers of sunlight through. He dropped his pack beside the single-bed frame and sat heavily. For the first time since he'd arrived, the whispering paused. Silence filled the cabin, and for a moment, Elias wondered if he had imagined everything. The first night as twilight colored the plains in lavender and amber. Elias lit a lantern and stepped outside. The prairie stretched wide, its edges dissolving into the rising night. Crickets began their steady rhythm, and the sky above opened into a vast expanse of fading blue. He pulled a blanket over his shoulders and sat on the small porch step. The breeze came. Again. Soft. Measured. Almost careful. The grass swayed in long, sweeping motions, and then there, a long, low hum. Not a melody, but something close. He closed his eyes. It reminded him of the murmur of voices in a church before the hymns began. A faraway chatter not loud enough to understand, not clear enough to interpret, just soft sound threaded through the moving wind, carrying something like memory. Elias's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He whispered without meaning to, "Who's there?" The wind answered only with its steady sigh, carrying the grass in smooth waves. But there was a weight to it, gentle, but unmistakable, like the presence of someone standing just behind him. He turned. Nothing but the empty plains. The lantern flickered slightly, caught by the breeze. Elias swallowed hard and pulled the blanket tighter. This is just new land, he told himself. New land always feels strange. But the whisper didn't feel new at all. It felt ancient. Signs in the morning. Jelius slept lightly, waking several times to the soft murmuring outside. Each time, it lulled him back into sleep, not frightening, just curious, like the land was humming a story meant for no one in particular. At dawn, he stepped outside and noticed something unusual. Footprints. Not human ones. Not animal ones. Just indentations, perfectly round, evenly spaced, moving in a curved line around his cabin, beginning and ending nowhere. He knelt and touched one. The soil wasn't pressed down as if stepped on. It was as if the earth itself had settled differently in those spots. The breeze drifted past him, and for a moment, he thought he heard it again, a soft hum, rising and falling. He stood slowly, scanning the horizon. This land has a way of welcoming strangers. A voice said gently from behind. Elias's hand flew to his revolver before he controlled himself. An elderly Lakota man stood a few paces away, leaning lightly on a staff. His clothing was simple, weathered, but his gaze was calm and steady. "How long have you been standing there?" Elias asked quietly. "Long enough," the man answered with a faint smile. "You scared me," Elias said, exhaling. "No," the old man replied. "The land scared you. I only arrived." He stepped forward, his eyes drifting over the tall grass as though reading a familiar text. "My name is Wicasa," he said. Elias blinked. He recognized the name from stories told in distant towns. A guide, a storyteller, a keeper of old knowledge. "I'm Elias Carter." "I know," Wicasa said, not unkindly. "The wind brought your name long before your horse reached this soil." Elias felt a tremor move through him. "The wind," he whispered. Wicasa nodded. "It speaks when it chooses. Not in words. Words are too small. It speaks in remembering." Elias swallowed. "Remembering what?" "The ones who came before," Wicasa said softly. "The ones who walked this land when the grass was taller than a man on horseback. The ones who lived, laughed, loved, and were taken away. Their stories do not vanish. They settle into the earth, and when the wind moves across it, the stories rise." Elias stared at him. "So, the whispers are echoes," Wicasa said simply. "Echoes that have finally found someone quiet enough to hear them." A cabin that Liston Celliers spent that day settling in, stacking firewood, patching the roof, clearing the dust inside. But all the while, he felt the quiet pressure of the whispering, not threatening, more like a companion who walked a few steps behind. When evening fell, the hum returned. This time, Elias didn't sit on the porch. He walked into the tall grass. It parted around him smoothly, brushing his coat, whispering as it moved. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once, a slow, soft, rhythmic murmur. He closed his eyes, and something inside him softened, some old hardness he had carried from place to place. The land didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, full of stories, full of memories, full of lives that had touched these plains long before he set foot here. The whispering grew deeper as the wind shifted direction. Not louder. Just closer. As if leaning in, gently, patiently. And Elias felt something he had not felt in years. Belonging. Not because the land wanted him, but because it accepted him. A message in the wind. Wicasa returned the next day. "You heard more?" the old man said without greeting. Elias nodded. "It feels like someone's singing." "Yes," Wakasa answered. But not to you. Then why can I hear it? Because you came alone, Wakasa said. Men who run from the world often become quiet enough to hear things others miss. Elias lowered his gaze. I did not come here to be part of any story. Wakasa smiled softly. Too late. The land has already begun telling one through you. Elias lifted his head slowly. What does it want from me? To listen, Wakasa said, and not to forget. He pointed to the grass. There are memories here, joyful ones, sorrowful ones, sacred ones. They drift like dust, like seeds. All the land asks is that you carry a few in your heart. Elias breathed deeply. The wind coiled around him, warm and patient. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like a man fleeing something. He felt like a man who had finally reached a place willing to share its secrets not through fear, but through gentle ancient song. The abandoned settlement near the horizon changed on a day it shouldn't have. Elias Carter had been living on the prairie long enough to know every curve of the land. Around his cabin, every dip in the tall grass, every cottonwood cluster, every place where the earth sloped into hidden ravines. The plains could be unpredictable, but they did not shift overnight. And yet, on a late summer morning tinged with silver light, something new stood far in the distance. He noticed it while he was mending a fence post near the edge of his property. The land, usually a seamless ocean of waving grass, was interrupted by small, rigid shapes. At first he thought they were shadows, cloud, shade, maybe, or distant bison. But the sky was bright and empty, and the shapes didn't move. They simply existed, quietly, as if they had been there all along. Elias straightened slowly, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Buildings, or what was left of them, wooden frames, roof lines. Maybe an old well, a ghost of a street, a ruined settlement. He blinked hard. That wasn't there before. He would have sworn it. The prairie wind brushed past him in a slow exhale, bending the grass in a soft bow. The familiar hum drifted faintly low, gentle, almost like an encouragement. Elias swallowed. So you want me to go? He murmured to the wind, not sure why he said it aloud. The wind didn't answer in words. It simply swept toward the shapes on the horizon, carrying a long sigh across the plains that made Elias feel, curiously, watched. Not threatened, just observed as if the land were waiting. A long walk into Histori Elias saddled his horse, brushed down its coat and filled a canteen. There was no trail leading to the distant buildings, but the grass bent in subtle lines as though guiding him. He followed. Hours passed in quiet rhythm, horse hooves muffled by soft earth, wind brushing through the grass like a whispering companion. The closer he drew to the shapes, the more the air changed. It grew still, thick, not humid, not heavy, just dense, as if he were stepping into a pocket of time that had refused to move forward. When the first building came into full view, Elias halted. It was a cabin, small, neat, utterly intact. The roof had not caved in. The wood was weathered but strong. The door still hung straight. It should have been crumbled by sun, rain, storms, and years. But it WASN single quotes T. Elias dismounted, moving slowly, as if afraid he might disturb something sacred. Around him, more buildings dotted the area, maybe a dozen in total. A small settlement, a frontier village lost to maps and memory. He walked forward, boots silent on the soft soil. A well stood at the center of the settlement, stone rim perfectly preserved. A rope still hanging, though the bucket was missing. There were houses, all modest but whole. There was a structure that might have been a schoolhouse, its single window still holding shards of glass. There were drying racks, empty garden plots, a narrow path worn into the earth by feet that no longer walked here. Elias breathed out in disbelief. How is this still standing? No roof sagged. No walls collapsed. No weeds burst through floorboards. It looked as if the people living here had stepped out for a moment and simply never returned. The air felt thick with memory. And the wind, usually chatty in its low murmurs, grew quiet, almost reverent. A door that opens on its own ears approached the nearest cabin, fingers brushing lightly over the aged but sturdy porch rail. He expected it to crumble under his touch. It did in single quotes T. Holding his breath. He reached for the doorknob. Before he touched it, the wind rose in a tiny stir, just enough to nudge the door open with a soft creak. Elias froze. The door swung gently inward, revealing a dim interior that smelled faintly of old pine and trapped sunlight. "All right," Elias whispered. "I guess we're doing this together." He stepped inside. The cabin was small but tidy. A table stood near the window, a chair tucked neatly beneath it. On the table sat a clay mug and a wooden bowl, still upright, still clean. A thin layer of dust coated everything, but not enough dust for the years that must have passed. A bed frame with a flattened straw mattress sat along the far wall. Above it hung a simple cross carved from driftwood. But what caught Elias's eye most was a single pair of shoes by the door. Men's boots, worn, mud still clinging to the soles, positioned neatly as if waiting for their owner to return and step into them. Elias felt the hush of the cabin settle into his bones. It didn't feel haunted. It felt paused. Suspended. Like a song that had been interrupted. Mid-melody. Double quotes. "Where did you all go?" Elias whispered. The cabin had no answer. But the wind at the door sighed softly, almost sympathetically. A journal left. Openly as explored 3 more houses before he found the object that would change the course of his understanding. It sat on a table inside a larger cabin, likely the home of whoever had been the settlement's leader or preacher or healer. A book. Not a Bible, not a ledger. A journal, leather-bound, pages slightly curled at the corners, lying open as though its owner had been writing in it moments before stepping away. Elias hesitated. He felt as though he were intruding, but the wind nudged gently through the open door, brushing against the pages in a faint flutter. "I'll take that as permission," Elias murmured and approached. The ink on the open page was faded but legible. June 8th, 1854. There is a sound in the wind tonight, a low hum like a distant song. Sarah says it is only the grass, but the children hear it too. They say it calls their names. Elias inhaled sharply. He turned the page gently. June 13th, 1854. The sound came again. Not frightening, just strange. The elders of the Lakota who visited last winter spoke of such things, voices carried by the land. I did not believe them then. I wonder now if I should have listened. A chill moved through Elias, not cold, but something deeper. He read on. June 19th, 1854. Tonight the wind was clear. It spoke one word. Perhaps it was not truly a word, but it sounded like stay. Or maybe remember. Elias felt the hairs on his arms lift. There were more entries, each one describing the settlement's peaceful life, intertwined with the growing mystery of the whispering plains. But then the tone shifted. July 3rd, 1854. The song in the wind has grown stronger. Not louder, but closer. Some say it is a blessing. Others worry it is a warning. I only know that it follows us. July 5th, 1850. For children dream of voices. Men wake with tears, though they cannot say why. July 7th, 1854. It is not a threat. I feel that in my bones. It is something old. Older than our cabins. Older than any map. It watches us the way the earth watches seeds. Elias turned the final written page. His pulse quickened. July 12th, 1854. Tomorrow we will follow the wind. It has been singing the same tone for 3 nights. A rising note, soft at the end. Calling, maybe. We do not abandon this place. We simply walk where the land asks us to walk. If someone finds these pages, tell them we were unafraid. Below the entry was a shaky signature. Anna Whitaker sat back, breath caught in his chest. They hadn't fled. They hadn't been attacked. They had left willingly, following the whispering wind. To where? Elias closed the journal slowly, reverently, then stood and stepped. Outside, the air felt thick again. But now he understood why. This ground held a story that had paused. Mid-sentence. And he was reading it centuries too late. The map in the dusty layers approached the old well at the center of the settlement again, feeling the journal's weight in his hands. As he stood there, the wind stirred gently, just enough to sweep dust across the ground in curling patterns. Something caught his eye. A line, then another, then a curve. The dust wasn't blowing randomly. It was forming shapes. Elias crouched, staring as the dust curled into a clear outline, a map. A rough map of the settlement. Paths, cabins, the well. But beyond the settlement, the dust line stretched outward into a curved line that bent eastward toward a dip in the plains. The wind whispered softly. Guiding. Showing. Elias reached out and touched the map lightly with his fingertips. The moment he did, the wind rose in a warm swirl, almost approving. "Are you telling me where they went?" he asked quietly. The wind moved gently, brushing his coat, rocking the tall grass in a slow wave. It felt like a yes. Elias stood slowly, scanning the direction indicated by the dust map. A long curve in the land, a dip in the horizon, a place he had never noticed. "These people followed you," he said to the wind. "And now you want me to follow them?" The wind brushed past him in a soft, slow hum, not urging, not commanding. Just inviting. Elias exhaled. His horse waited patiently nearby, ears flicking as though listening. Elias placed a hand on its neck. "All right," he whispered. "Let's see where their story went." The path no map has drawn as Elias rode eastward. The sensation of time thickened again. The tall grass parted for him, subtle, not dramatic, but real, as though the land itself were clearing a path. After an hour, he reached the curve in the land. A shallow valley opened before him, and there at the valley's center an oak tree stood alone, wide and ancient, far older than any settlement. Its branches spread like quiet arms over the land. Beneath the oak lay shapes, not graves, not abandoned belongings. Just stones, hundreds of them. Smooth. Rounded, placed with intention. Elias dismounted slowly. The wind sighed around him in soft spirals. He approached the nearest stone and knelt. There were no names, no carvings, no symbols. Just stones, placed gently on the earth in a wide ring beneath the oak. Elias exhaled shakily. "Is this where they went?" he whispered. The wind responded in a low hum, mournful, loving, impossible to translate, but full of emotion. Elias listened. The hum softened. Then grew melodic. A long, rising note. Just like Anna Whitaker had described in her final journal entry. The same hum that had led the settlers here. The same hum that now wrapped around Elias like a blanket. Not sadness, not fear. Acceptance. The stones were not graves. They were markers, a memory circle, a place the settlers had chosen together not to die, but to return themselves to the land. Joining the ancient voices that had whispered to them, Elias felt tears sting his eyes, not because the place was tragic, but because it felt peaceful. This was not a hidden tragedy. This was a chosen ending. The settlers had become part of the story, the land. Preserved. Their voices mingled now with the wind. Their memories hummed in the tall grass. Their footsteps lived in the soil. Elias stood slowly. The wind rose gently, brushing away his tears. "You brought me here," he whispered, "to show me what remembering looks like." The plains answered with soft, melodic murmuring, the kind that lulled and soothed and filled a man with quiet awe. Elias rested his hand on one of the stones and closed his eyes. "I won't forget," he promised. The wind circled him once more, warm and grateful. The settlement at his back ears returned to the abandoned settlement as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in long streaks of rose and gold. The buildings glowed softly in the dying light, looking not abandoned but resting. He walked slowly through the main path, his hand skimming the tops of the tall grass. The whispers followed him, quiet, melodic, no longer mysterious. Not a warning, not a call, a greeting. A welcome. He paused at the edge of the settlement, turning back one last time. "Thank you," he said softly to the prairie. The settlement did not change. The wind did not shift dramatically, but a single blade of grass near the well bent forward in a slow bow. Elias bowed back. Then he climbed onto his horse and began the long ride home. As he rode, the wind hummed gently, as if telling him they were never lost, they were never alone, and now neither are you. The wind had always been a companion to Elias Carter. Since the day he arrived on the Tallgrass Plains, it hummed to him. It guided him. It soothed his nights with its ancient, rhythmic murmur. But something changed after he discovered the abandoned settlement and the circle of memory stones. Beneath the lone oak, the wind began arriving. Earlier and stranger at dusk. Every dusk it didn't behave like wind should, not drifting casually from the west or sliding in cool currents from the north. Instead, it approached with purpose, beginning at the horizon and moving inward, as though the entire prairie inhaled and exhaled in a single direction, almost as if something unseen was walking across the plains, and the wind was following it. A sense of someone near Elias first noticed it 2 days after returning from the forgotten settlement. He was chopping firewood behind the cabin, the sun low and golden, when he felt the familiar brush of a breeze on his neck. But the direction was wrong. The wind swept toward him from the south smooth, steady, warm, though the sky showed no sign of a southern weather shift. He paused, axe suspended mid-air, listening. The grass behind the cabin began to sway in a single, unified motion. Not chaotic, not random. Ordered. As if the entire field bowed gently toward him, then rose again. The hum came next, long, low, soft, not the usual whispering the plains carried. This note was deeper, drawn out, like a solitary line of a song being played again and again. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon, the direction shifted slowly, purposefully turning to the east, then north, then west. Following some unseen path, Elias lowered the axe, his breath catching. Not a storm, he murmured, not weather. The wind brushed his sleeves, circling him in a slow spiral, not threatening, just watching. The next evening confirmed it wasn't his imagination. Elias stepped outside as the sky turned peach-colored, and the air sat still enough to feel fragile. He waited, arms folded, gaze sweeping across the open land. Then, exactly as the last glimmer of sunlight touched the grass tips, it came. A soft push of wind from the east, smoothing the tall grass as though stroking it with a giant invisible hand. Elias felt it graze his cheek and neck, felt it twist around his boots, felt it brush the cabin walls. This time it carried a different hum, a higher pitch, almost like a voice holding a note from far away. Elias looked toward the horizon. No figures, no animals, no movement except the shifting breeze. Yet the sensation of presence was unmistakable. Not someone approaching, someone passing, walking the same unseen path through the plains at the same moment each evening. Elias breathed out slowly. Who are you? The wind didn't answer in words, but it turned again north, this time moving as if following footsteps. Wakas's warning on the third evening. Wakasa returned. Elias had been standing outside long before dusk, waiting for the wind's strange behavior to begin again. But the sound of slow, steady hoofbeats reached him before the breeze shifted. Wakasa rode toward him on a paint horse, the animal moving with practiced calm. The old Lakota man dismounted without a word, his dark eyes sweeping the plains with quiet knowing. You feel it, Wakasa said at last. Elias nodded. Something walks this land at dusk. Wakasa didn't look surprised. It has walked for a very long time. Elias frowned. Is it dangerous? No. Wakasa's voice was gentle, but it is powerful. The old man approached the tall grass, kneeling slowly and running his hand through it. There are old paths on this plains, he said softly. Paths walked long before any settlement was built. Trails carved not by feet, but by memory. Elias felt the wind stir slightly at his back, as if listening. Whatever walks at dusk, Wakasa said, is not a ghost in the way you fear. It is an echo with purpose. Echo of what? Elias whispered. Of someone who loved this land so deeply, Wakasa replied, that even after their body returned to the earth, their presence kept walking the path they walked in life. Elias swallowed. Why at dusk? Because dusk is the hour when the veil between past and present thins, Wakasa said. The land breathes out the day and breathes in the night. The old ones walked there not to frighten but to remember. Elias looked toward the horizon where the sun was nearly gone. What does it want? He asked. Wicasa turned to him slowly. To be acknowledged, he said. To be seen, and perhaps to speak. The dusk walked against the sun touched the edge of the land. Wicasa stepped back. Watch carefully, he whispered. The wind will show you the shape the eyes cannot see. Elias felt his pulse quicken. The first breeze reached them. Soft, warm, purposeful. The tall grass bent in a smooth arc, curling around an invisible form. Elias stepped forward slowly, his breath shallow. The wind circled him, then drifted outward as if moving ahead of him, guiding him to follow. Wicasa kept his distance, watching with calm reverence. Elias walked beside the shifting wind. The grass parted around him, not aggressively, but gracefully opening a path that closed again once he passed. The hum grew louder, a layered tone, not a single voice, many voices blending into one soft, steady song. Elias felt something brush past his shoulder. Not wind. Presence. Something shaped like a person, tall, steady, silent, walking the same direction he was. Elias closed his eyes. He felt a warmth radiate beside him, gentle and patient, like someone unthreatening who had waited a long time for company. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Who are you? The wind shifted direction, instantly turning west, and Elias followed it without hesitation. Wicasa called from behind. Do not fear it. It means no harm. The hum rose, not louder, but clearer. The day started with silence, a kind of deep, unbroken quiet that wrapped the plains in soft cotton. No bird song, no rustle of distant deer. The wind slept in the tall grass, and the sky, pale and open, held its breath. Elias Carter woke to that calm and sensed immediately that the land was waiting for him. He sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The gentle hush around him felt almost sacred. Something would happen today. Not a warning, just a pull. A nudge from the invisible presence he had grown used to since arriving on this land. When he stepped outside, the grass glimmered with dew, each blade catching the morning light like thin strands of silver. Elias stood barefoot on the porch, letting the earth's cold seep gently into his skin. The prairie seemed to whisper without sound. Come. He inhaled deeply and felt it again, an urge, subtle but persistent, tugging him toward the abandoned settlement near the horizon. It had been days since he last visited, yet he felt the memories there waiting, like pages of a book he hadn't finished reading. He saddled his horse slowly, speaking in a low voice as he tightened the cinch strap. All right, friend. Seems the plains want to show us something new. The horse snorted softly, as if in agreement. Elias mounted, and together they crossed the waves of tall grass that parted gently around them. The settlement that refused to decay, approaching the abandoned settlement, still felt like stepping back into someone else's dream. The cabins stood as if time had politely stepped aside for them. Roofs remained whole, walls upright, windows quiet but unbroken. Elias dismounted and let his horse wander. Then he walked into the heart of the settlement. The air here always felt different, thicker, warmer, filled with a quiet hum that he could almost feel against his skin. He paused. Beside the first cabin he ever explored, the one where the shoes by the door sat neatly, as if the owner had slipped them off only that morning. Something about this cabin tugged at him again today. The wind, still sleepy, nudged a thin swirl of dust across the porch. Elias's breath caught. The dust gathered at a single point, forming a faint circle near one of the floorboards. He knelt down. The floorboard, at first glance, looked no different from the others, but when Elias pressed gently against its edge, it shifted just barely. A hidden space. Is this what you wanted me to find? He whispered into the stillness. The silence answered softly, like a held breath. Elias wedged his fingers beneath the edge of the board and lifted. It came loose more easily than he expected, revealing a dark cavity beneath the floor. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth, lay a small leather-bound journal, weathered, thin, edges curled, as if handled by trembling hands. Elias lifted it carefully, brushing away the dust. The leather felt warm, as though it had been waiting for years to be touched again. He sat on the porch, sunlight pooling around him, and opened the journal to the first page. Page 1. Forgive me if my words shake. The ink had faded but remained readable. June 2nd, 1854. Forgive me if my words shake. The wind has been restless tonight. It speaks not like a breeze, but like a breath close to my ear. Elias's chest tightened. The handwriting was shaky. Uneven, someone writing fast, afraid they might lose courage if they stopped. Sarah says I am imagining things, but the children woke crying. They said a voice whispered their names through the cracks in the wall. Elias felt the air shift slightly around him. The same voice that had whispered to him, soft, melodic, ancient. He turned the page. Page 2. We tried not to listen. June 5th. We tried not to listen. The voice comes with dusk, right when the sun kisses the grass good night. It is not angry, but it is insistent. It wants something. Elias paused, staring out toward the valley where the circle of stones lay. The settler's words echoed through time like a slow, trembling melody. He turned the page. Page 3. Do not stand outside when it calls your name. The next entry was shorter. June 9th. If this journal is found, hear me. Do not stand outside when the voice grows loud. It is not unkind, but it remembers old paths. If you stand in its path, it might think you belong to those who walked here before. Elias exhaled. Shakil. Why not the dusk walker? The gentle presence he had followed across the plains, the voice that guided the wind. Had the settlers heard it too? The journal seemed to vibrate faintly in his hands, or perhaps that was only the plains shifting beneath him. He read on. Page 4. My husband followed the wind. June 12th. My husband followed the wind tonight. He said it hummed a tune he remembered from childhood, though no one else heard it. He walked farther than he should have. I called his name, but the wind answered before he could. When he returned, he looked different, not harmed, not frightened, just far away, as though he had been speaking with people I could not see. Elias closed his eyes. He remembered how he had felt standing beside the unseen presence, the warmth, the tenderness, the strange comfort of being acknowledged by something older than memory. He turned the page again. Page 5. There are footsteps in the grass. June 14th. Tonight there were footsteps in the grass around our cabin. Soft, steady, slow. The children hid beneath the blankets. I held my breath so long I felt faint. But when I opened the door in the morning, there were no footprints, only bent grass, as though someone walked without weight. Elias felt a chill crawl up his arms. He had seen those same indentations around his own cabin, perfectly round, beginning and ending nowhere. The presence hadn't changed. Time had. Page 6. The wind remembers everything. A longer entry filled the next page. June 18th. The elders who visited last winter were right. The wind remembers everything. It carries the stories of those who walked here long before we arrived. It has begun to sing at night, not loud but steady, a single note, a heartbeat in the air. My youngest fell asleep listening to it and woke with tears in her eyes. She said it was beautiful. Elias read the words twice, imagining a child in a small cabin, soothed by a hum that blended with the breath of the land. He turned the page slowly. Page 7. If you hear the warning, stay inside. The handwriting grew shaky now. June 21st. The wind's tone changed tonight. Higher, sharper, not angry but pleading. It is warning us of something. If you find this journal, please listen. When the wind rises at dusk and the grass leans toward you, stay inside. Do not greet it. Do not answer it. Elias felt his heart tighten. He had stood outside many evenings. He had followed the wind. He had listened to the hum like an old friend. Had he been walking a path meant only for the settlers? Or had the land chosen him? He read on, hands trembling slightly now. Page 8. It wants us to follow. June 24th. My husband says the wind is not warning us. It is calling us, asking us to follow the old path, the one carved by someone who walked here before any settlement was built. I do not want to go, but the children dream of the voice and wake smiling. They say the voice is lonely. A soft breeze brushed Elias's ear, as though agreeing. He swallowed hard and continued. Page 9. The final and tried last written page bore the most trembling handwriting of all. June 29th, 1854. Tonight we'll follow the voice. I am no longer afraid. It sings our names with tenderness like a family calling us home. The path leads east, toward the lone tree. If someone finds this journal, know this, we were not taken. We were welcomed. The ink ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted by the soft, melodic hum that once again called her name. Elias closed the journal slowly, cradling it against his chest. A long breath escaped him, shaky but gentle. The settlers had not run. They had followed. Just as he had. Just as the land was calling him still. The wind rose now, lightly stirring his hair, brushing the pages of the journal with a tender touch as if greeting the words it remembered. Before they were written, Elias whispered into the warm breeze, "I hear you." The wind deepened into a soft hum, a sound like gratitude, a sound like memory, a sound like the land saying, "There is more." Elias stood, tucking the journal beneath his arm. He would return to his cabin, read every word again, and then follow the voice that had guided others long. Before him, the path waited. The dusk walker waited. The land waited. And Elias, now keeper of the journals, trembling. Warnings felt ready to walk deeper into the mystery that the wind had carried across centuries. Elias Carter did not expect visitors that morning, yet the land always seemed to know what he needed before he did. The day arrived soft and golden, sunlight melting across the prairie like warm honey. The air was cool but promising to warm, and the grass shimmered as though small sparks of dawn clung to the blades. Elias had barely stepped off his porch when he saw them, two Lakota elders on horseback, riding slowly from the eastern horizon. Their silhouettes were patient and dignified, moving not with urgency but with purpose, as though guided by the same invisible presence that had shaped every strange whisper Elias had encountered since he arrived on this land. He stood still, letting the moment unfold. When the elders reached the edge of his property, they dismounted with quiet grace. The older of the two, tall, lean, with silver hair braided down his back, placed a hand over his chest in greeting. The younger elder, though still much older than Elias, carried the same deep calm etched in his posture. The taller one spoke first. "You are Elias Carter," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Elias replied, returning a respectful nod. "We are told," the silver-haired elder continued, "that the wind has taken notice of you." Elias felt the soft brush of breeze along his shoulders, as though the land were eavesdropping. "I suppose it has," Elias said quietly. "Or maybe I've been noticing it." The younger elder smiled, lines folding like gentle ripples around his eyes. "Both can be true," he said. "We came because the land whispered your name to us 3 nights ago." Elias's breath caught. "My name?" "Yes," the elder replied. "It spoke of a man who walks the plains with listening feet. The land remembers such people. It remembers people like one who came before you, the one we called the guide." Elias felt a pull in his chest, the same tug he felt every time the wind called him. Who was he? Elias asked softly. The elders exchanged a look, one of quiet reverence, as though sharing the name of someone not merely from the past, but from a sacred story. The taller elder gestured to Elias's porch. "Sit with us," he said. "There is a story the plains want you to hear." The story begins. 3 men sat on the small wooden porch, the sun warming their shoulders as the wind drifted in small, steady sighs. The elders closed their eyes briefly, as though greeting an old friend. Finally, the silver-haired elder began. Many generations before the settlers arrived, before fences carved the land into pieces, before the tall grass was cut, there lived a man who walked these plains with the quiet of a deer and the patience of the moon. His voice moved like rhythm, smooth and calming. He was not a chief. He was not a warrior. He was not a man who rose in battle or led men into war. He was something rarer, something older. The younger elder picked up the story. He was a guide, not the kind who pointed the way with his hand, but the kind who listened. He knew the land as though it were a living, breathing companion. He heard the earth speaking beneath his feet. He heard the wind carrying messages across the grass. Elias leaned forward, his heart steady but curious. What was his name? The wind shifted softly around them, brushing Elias's hair as though answering before the elders could. "We do not speak his name anymore," the elder replied. "Not because it is forbidden, but because it belongs to the land now. He returned himself to the earth, and so his name is sung only by the wind." Elias felt a chill, not cold, but deep, ancient. The elder continued. "He was born with a strange gift. When he was a small boy, he could hear voices in the wind, not the voices of spirits that frighten or the cries of storms. These voices were gentle, wise. They carried the memories of those who had walked here before. He grew," said the younger elder, "and the land taught him. He learned to guide lost hunters home," the silver-haired elder said. "He learned to lead travelers through fog and snow. He learned to help those who wandered too far from safety. He became known," the younger elder added, "not just among our people, but among all who crossed these plains. Even the animals seemed to trust him. Horses that had never met him would approach. Wolves watched from a distance but never harmed him." Elias swallowed, imagining such a man walking this very land centuries ago, quiet feet moving through grass, stars watching him, the wind speaking in tones only he understood. "He sounds like someone the land loved." Elias whispered. The elder nodded. The land loved him so much that when his body grew old, the earth did not want to let him go. The guides passing, the younger elder continued the tale. When the guide reached the end of his years, he did not fear death. He walked alone to the valley where the lone cottonwood tree still stands. That place was sacred even then. It is a place where the land remembers the strongest. Elias felt a faint shiver. He knew the tree. He had stood beside it. He had felt the presence there. The guide sat beneath the tree, the younger elder whispered, and told the wind he was ready. The wind came to him, the elder said, not as a storm, not as a cold breath, but as a warm, gentle hum. "A song?" the younger elder murmured. Elias closed his eyes briefly. He had heard that song, felt it, the melody that floated across the plains each dusk. What happened to him? Elias asked. The elder smiled softly. He passed as quietly as he lived. His body returned to earth. At his voice, he paused, letting the wind answer. A soft hum rose around them, so faint Elias wondered if the elders heard it too. His voice remained. The elder finished. It joined the wind, the guide who never stopped walking. Two elders looked toward the horizon, the direction from which the dusk wind always approached. Long after his passing, the younger elder said, travelers began hearing a hum at dusk. Those who listened closely felt the presence of someone walking beside them. Some saw the grass bend as though a person walked through it, the elder added. Some felt warmth on their shoulder when they were lost or afraid. Elias's breath caught. He had felt that warmth, seen the grass bend, heard the hum slide through twilight. Was it him? Elias whispered. The guide. Yes, the elders replied together, their voices like to notes of the same song. But why does he still walk? Elias asked. The elders exchanged a solemn look. Because the silver-haired elder said gently, not all stories end when a body returns to the earth. Some souls stay to protect the land they love. Some voices remain to help those who walk blindly. And some remain because they were never meant to leave. The younger elder leaned forward slightly. The guide walks at dusk to help travelers find their way. But the path he walks is the one he walked in life. If someone stands directly in that path. He paused. Elias already knew. The guide may believe the traveler is meant to follow him. A chill traced Elias's spine, not fear, but understanding. That is why, the elder explained, your settlers followed the wind. The guide sang to them. They felt called. They were not taken. They were invited. Elias looked down at his hands. And what about me? The elder smiled softly. You listen, the taller elder said. Few people listen. Fewer still understand the language of the wind. It has chosen you, the younger elder said. Elias looked up sharply. Chosen me for what? To remember, the elder whispered. To walk with respect. To understand the old stories. To keep the land's memory alive when others try to bury it. The wind stirred gently around them, as though affirming each word. The danger of the guide's song story took a darker turn. Before you think only of peace, the elder said, You must know the other part. Elias nodded slowly. I'm listening. The younger elder's eyes darkened with centuries of memory. The guide's voice is strong. At dusk, when the veil between worlds thins, the hum becomes more powerful. It can soothe. It can call. But it can also mislead those who do not understand it. He tightened his jaw slightly. There were travelers, he said, who followed the hum too far, into nights when storms rose, and never found their way back. Elias's breath faltered. The guide harmed them? No, the elder said firmly. The wind carried his voice into their ears at the wrong moment. They did not understand what the call meant. They walked without listening to the land beneath their feet. The younger elder placed a hand over his heart. The guide never meant danger. But the land is not without danger, and his voice, no matter how soft, cannot stop the storms. Elias exhaled slowly. I understand. The elders looked at him with quiet approval. The guide knows you've silver-haired elder pointed a slow finger toward the horizon. You have walked part of his path already. You have felt his voice. The land sees you. The wind recognizes you. Elias felt a warmth around his shoulders, not heat. Not touch, just the familiar sensation of being noticed by something unseen. And because the guide knows you, the elder continued. He may wish to show you what he showed the settlers who came before. Elias's lips parted. What does he want to show me? The elder rose slowly to his feet, looking toward the distant cottonwood tree, a place where memory and land are one, a place few living eyes have seen. Elias swallowed. The valley, he whispered. The elder nodded. Double quotes the guide's final path, he said softly, and the place where he returned to the earth. The warning before the elders departed. The younger one gave Elias a final warning. When the wind shifts at dusk, and the hum begins, you may follow it, but only if you feel peace. If your heart grows heavy or your skin chills, stop. Elias listened intently. The guide's voice can help you, the elder continued. But if sorrow fills you suddenly, that means you have stepped onto a part of the path meant only for the dead. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle into him. I will honor that. The elder touched Elias's shoulder gently. We know you will. The wind returns. The elders mounted their horses and rode toward the horizon. Elias watched until they faded into the tall grass. Swallowed softly by distance, he stood on the porch long after they disappeared, letting the silence return. Then dashed just as the sun brushed the edge of the world. The wind shifted. Soft, warm, knowing. It approached from the east, bending the grass in slow arcs. Humming a tone Elias recognized instantly, the guide's voice. This time, Elias didn't move. He simply listened. The hum was gentle, inviting, curious, not a warning, not a danger. A greeting. The grass bowed. The wind circled his boots. A faint warmth touched his arm. Elias closed his eyes. I hear you, he whispered. The wind hummed once, a long, rising note, then drifted toward the valley where the cottonwood stood. This time, Elias stepped off the porch and followed. He walked slowly, respectfully, heart steady, breath calm, trusting the gentle pull of the ancient guide who had walked these plains long before his name was written into the land's memory. Wind had grown strangely tender in the days since Elias. Carter discovered the hidden journal beneath the floorboards of the abandoned settler cabin. It no longer hummed only at dusk, nor whispered solely in the cool hours before sleep. Now it seemed to drift around Elias at unexpected moments, when he fetched water from the pump, when he stood in the doorway gazing toward the horizon, even when he sat with his hands resting on his knees, thinking of nothing but the silence. It felt almost as though the plains were watching him, or waiting. The journal had changed everything. The warnings written in trembling handwriting still echoed in his mind, words of voices in the wind, of footsteps that left no marks, of a presence that called with gentle insistence. But it was one passage more than any other that would not leave him. Our daughter hears the prairie speaking her name. Elias had read that line again and again until the letters blurred. A vanished child, a family who followed the wind, a story that felt unfinished. And now, each time Elias closed his eyes at night, he heard something faint, a soft, high voice woven into the hum of the wind. Not distinct, not clear, but unmistakably different from the deeper tones he had grown accustomed to, almost like a child humming, almost like a child calling someone in the distance. He tried to ignore it at first, told himself it was imagination, but the journal had changed something inside him. He was not merely a man living on the plains anymore. He was a witness to memories the land refused to bury, and the land, it seemed, had chosen him to hear more. The whisper that spoke in a meat began the morning after his reading. Elias stood near the pump, filling a tin pail with cold water. When the breeze brushed the side of his face soft and deliberate, he paused. The water splashed over the rim of the pail, his hands trembling slightly. The wind rose again, low, steady, warm then, floating through it, so faint it could have been a trick of breath, a single syllable. Not a full name, not a spoken word, just a sound, a drifting note that carried a feeling rather than a meaning. Elias froze, because the sound seemed to be his name. Carter, Carter, a soft, breathy echo, fading before it fully formed. He turned slowly, scanning the open land around him. "Who's there?" he whispered, but the grass swayed innocently in the morning light, and the sky remained wide and pale. Elias swallowed hard and set down the pail. It was time to return to the abandoned settlement. The answers he needed were not on his small patch of land. They were where the settlers had lived, and where a small child had disappeared, the cabin with the tiny shoes. Be late morning. Elias had saddled his horse and crossed the distance to the preserved frontier village. The air grew denser as he approached, as though stepping into a pocket of memory. He dismounted and walked the crooked path between the cabins. The wind sighed gently. The grass leaned toward him. The same cabin as before called to him, the one where he'd found the first journal. But today, something else caught his eye. A much smaller cabin stood near the far edge of the settlement. Its door hung slightly crooked, its frame narrower, its window lower to the ground. A child's home. Elias approached it carefully, as though afraid to startle something inside. The floor creaked when he stepped onto the porch. Dust swirled in the slant of sunlight through the doorway. He knelt and pushed the door open with 2 fingers. The room smelled faintly of old fabric and dry straw, and there against the wall lay a pair of small shoes. Tiny, brown, handled with care. One shoe was upright. The other was tipped slightly to the side, as if a child had slipped them off in a hurry. Elias's breath wavered. He stepped inside with reverence. The cabin was simple: 1 bed, 1 table, 1 small woven rug. On the table sat a wooden toy carved in the shape of a buffalo, the wood smoothed by small fingers long gone. He touched the toy gently. The wind rose through the doorway. Not a warning, a greeting, a soft, high hum drifted through the room, different from the lower tones he had heard before. A child's voice in the hum. Elias felt a strange heat gather in his eyes. He swallowed. "I'm listening," he whispered. The hum flowed around him like warm air. Then stilled. Elias knew what he had to do. He had to find the child's belongings. He had to find another journal. There were too many unanswered questions. He began searching the cabin slowly, respectfully. He lifted the rug, checked the windowsill, looked beneath the bed. Nothing. When he pressed gently on one of the floorboards, it creaked loudly but didn't shift. He tried another, and another. After nearly 20 minutes, he found it, near the bed, far in the corner. A small board that rocked ever so slightly under pressure. His heart thudded softly. He knelt and ran his hand along its edge, slipped his fingers beneath, lifted. The board came up in a slow arc, releasing a puff of dust. Beneath it, wrapped carefully in a piece of faded cloth, was a small object, the size of a child's hand. Elias picked it up with extreme care. He unfolded the cloth. A tiny leather-bound journal rested. Inside, fragile, worn, edges frayed. He held it to his chest for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the weight of what he had found settle into him. This was the missing child's voice, the voice the prairie still carried. He stood and walked back onto the porch, sunlight warming his back as he opened the journal to the first page. The wind knows my name. The handwriting was delicate round letters, uneven spacing, the marks of someone very young. Elias adjusted the journal in his hands and began to read. My name is Clara Whitaker. I am 8 years old. I like wildflowers and the sound the grass makes when you walk through it. Elias felt a sad smile touch his lips. He turned the page. June 3rd, 1850. For Mama says the wind is strong this year. Papa says it's only the weather. But I hear it saying things. It knows my name. It knows how old I am. I think it knows who used to live here before we came. Elias's skin prickled. He turned the page again. The prairie calls me to play. June 6th, 1850. For this morning the wind told me to come outside. Mama said I could only go if I stayed close. But the prairie called me. It said Clara, Clara, soft and far away. I followed it to the tall grass. It felt warm and happy, like someone smiling. Elias's throat tightened. The child had followed the voice, just as he had. Only she had done so without understanding. He turned the page. A man made of wind. June 9th, 1854. I saw someone today. I think it was a man, but made of wind. When I looked at him, he wasn't there. When I looked away, he walked in the grass. He did not scare me. He felt kind, like he knew me. Elias felt the hum float by his ear, soft and high, like a sigh. The presence, the dusk walker, the guide. He had shown himself to her. Elias read on. He wants me to come back. June 11th, 1850. For the wind man told me a secret, not in words, in feelings. He said this land remembers me. He said I belong to the prairie because I can hear it. Elias blinked hard. He had felt something similar, the sense of being welcomed, chosen. He turned the page.
The path of the returning. The sky darkened fully now, a vast quilt of deep indigo. The stars, dozens at first, then hundreds, tilted and slid into position. Long, straight lines, curving arcs, points forming shapes Elias couldn't yet understand. He stepped farther into the tall grass, lantern swinging in his hand. Though he hardly needed its glow, the sky had grown brighter than usual. The stars pulsed with a soft, silvery shimmer, like a heartbeat. The hum deepened. The child's voice hummed in harmony. The air thickened with meaning. The pattern snapped into place. Elias gasped. It was a trail, a star map, a winding river-like path drawn across the heavens. Just like the drawings in the settler's journal, just like the markings he had seen once in the dust map created by the wind. Just like the invisible footsteps the guide walked every dusk. The stars had aligned into the path of the returning. He whispered the name aloud, voice trembling. As he did, the wind pressed softly against him, warm and full of presence. Yes, the guide's approval. Then a moment later, the child's whisper, follow. Elias lifted his face fully toward the sky. The star path shimmered, and for the first time, he realized it pointed somewhere. Not abstract, not symbolic. It pointed directly to the valley where the guide had died. The same place where Clara had vanished. The same place where the settlers had walked peacefully into memory. The celestial path was guiding him there. The sky, the land, and the wind were speaking in one voice. And Elias felt the pull so strongly, his breath quivered. He nodded, then whispered into the wind, I'm coming. The prairie had moods, Elias Carter had learned. Some days it murmured softly, brushing whispers along the tall grass as if recalling old stories. Other days it held its breath, silent and watchful. But the strangest mornings were the ones when the prairie seemed to move while no one was looking. It began on a Tuesday just before dawn. Elias woke earlier than usual, stirred by something he could not name, a faint shifting, like cloth brushing wood, though the air inside his cabin was still. He rose, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside into the cool bluish light before sunrise. That was when he saw them. Footprints. Dozens of them. They circled the cabin in a perfect ring, single file, evenly spaced, small depressions pressed into the soil like careful steps. They were unmistakably human footprints, barefoot, adult-sized. But the ground was bone dry. The prairie hadn't seen rain in over a week. There was no mud, no softened earth that could take an imprint, and yet the footprints were clear, as though someone had stepped in soft clay and left delicate impressions that had magically hardened in place. Elias crouched, his heart thudding softly. He touched one of the prints. The soil didn't sink beneath his fingers. It was firm, unbroken, undisturbed. But the print was real. Impossible, but real. He rose slowly, scanning the horizon. Nothing but tall grass swaying in the early morning breeze. No sign of a traveler, no scattered footprints leading toward or away from the circle. Just the ring. A perfect ring. Not human, Elias whispered. The wind brushed his cheek in a soft exhale as though answering. He swallowed and stepped backward toward the cabin door. The footprints were undeniable, and they were not the first strange thing the land had shown him. But this was different. The whispers in the wind were gentle. The presence he felt at dusk was calm, guiding. The echoes in the tall grass were old but warm. The footprints, however, they felt like a message, or a warning, or a watchful circling by something that had come close, closer than anything else had ever before. He stepped back inside, heart unsettled, and the wind hummed faintly behind him. The second morning confirmed it wasn't a mistake. Elias woke with the uneasy expectation of something waiting. He stepped out, boots crunching lightly against dry soil, and there they were again. Fresh footprints. The ring was slightly wider this time, circling the cabin at a more generous distance, but still perfect, precise, evenly spaced. It was as though someone had walked around the cabin slowly, methodically, thoughtfully, as if studying it. Elias crouched beside one of the impressions. The shape was exact. Arches, heels, the soft curve where the ball of the foot touched the earth. But the ground remained undisturbed, firm, dry. How can footprints appear without touching the ground? Elias whispered. The wind drifted around him, low and warm. Not answering, not denying, just present. He touched the print with the tips of his fingers. It felt like the impression of weight without pressure, shape without force, a memory pressed into the earth by something that carried no physical form, something walking, but not with feet. Elias stood, breath steady, but uneasy. "I don't think you're trying to scare me," he said aloud, voice soft, directed to the invisible presence he had felt many times before. "But what are you trying to show me?" The wind shifted slightly, brushing the side of his face. A nudge. A direction. East. Toward the abandoned settlement. Toward the lone cottonwood tree. Elias swallowed. I should go? The wind rose faintly. Agreement. The footprints circled his cabin like a compass. The wind pointed the way. The land waited. The elders arrived again. Before Elias left, two familiar figures appeared at the horizon, moving slowly, purposely, like ghosts wrapped in morning sunlight. The Lakota elders. This time, they dismounted before reaching the cabin. You have seen them, the silver-haired elder said without greeting. Elias nodded. Footprints. Fresh every morning. The younger elders scanned the ground. He didn't need to kneel to see what Elias had seen. They walk around your home because they are uncertain. You are not a threat to them, but you are not yet part of this land's memory either. Elias frowned. What are they? The wind sighed. The older elder answered quietly. Echoes. Elias's skin tingled. Echoes of who? He whispered. Those who walked before, the elder replied. Those who left no graves, those whose names were sung into the wind. Some linger. Some follow the path of the guide. Some watch the living to see what kind of person has entered their home. The younger elder touched one of the footprints gently, his fingers passing through the imprint without disturbing it. They are not dangerous, he said, but they are curious. Elias breathed slowly. So they're watching me? The elder said yes. You have listened to the wind. That makes you different from most. They wish to know if you walk with respect. The elder stepped closer and lowered his voice. But there is more. The footprints appear after midnight, when the stars are deepest. That means the one who leaves them is not only watching. He paused. He is searching. Elias stiffened. Searching for what? The elder's gaze darkened, though not with fear. With memory. The elders walked with Elias around the ring of footprints. They circle you, the elder said, because circles are sacred to those who walked this land. A circle protects. A circle speaks.
The grass that parted in invitation. As Elias approached the deeper plains, the tall grass began to shift unnaturally. A path opened, not wide, not forced, but with slow, gentle movement, as though the grass were stepping aside with quiet respect. Elias's pulse hammered. He had seen grass bend before, when the guide walked beside him, just out of sight. But this path was different. It moved ahead of him, as if leading him towards something waiting. He dismounted, letting the horse graze, and walked slowly along the opening path. The wind grew warmer. The voice grew clearer. Elias, listen. Elias's throat tightened. The voice sounded closer now, not far above, not miles away, but within the grass itself. He whispered back, I'm here. The wind blew over his face, soft, careful, like a grateful exhale. Then the voice formed a full word, clear, defined, sharp as breath. Follow. Elias nodded. He didn't even realize tears had gathered in his eyes. The wind pressed lightly against his arm, like someone guiding him with a hand. He followed. The Memory Meadow. The path ended in a small clearing, a natural circle of flattened grass, glowing gold in the sunlight. The air felt heavier here, full of memory. as though footsteps from centuries ago still trembled across the soil. Elias stepped into the center. The wind rose, high, low, layered. Voices woven together, dozens, hundreds, as if all the echoes of the plains had come to witness his arrival. He felt the temperature shift, warm on his left, cool on his right, as if two presences stood beside him. The voice spoke again, but this time it was not carried by one presence. It was formed by many, soft, ancient, rhythmic. Elias, we remember. Elias's throat trembled. Remember what? He whispered. The wind circled him. Grass leaned inward. The sky dimmed slightly. The voice came again, clearer, stronger. Hear the land. Elias swallowed. I've been listening, he said softly. The wind brushed his cheek, tender, almost proud. Then the next words whispered across the clearing. We chose you. His knees nearly buckled. Chosen by the land, by the echoes, by the ancient voices that had sung across the prairie long before his birth. Why me? Elias asked, voice cracking. The grass trembled. The wind slowed. A single word formed. Because you hear. Elias closed his eyes, overcome. For a long moment, he simply stood in the circle of golden grass, letting the voices wash over him. He heard the guide's low hum, the child's high whisper, the settler's distant tones, and others, voices older than any journal, any cabin, any trail. A language older than English, older than Lakota, older than maps. A language of land and memory. The voice spoke again, trembling with ancient weight. We must show you. Elias breathed deeply. What do you want to show me? The wind shifted, urgent now, pulling him away from the clearing, toward something hidden, toward a place the guide had never taken him before. The moon rose earlier than usual that night, an enormous pale disk climbing over the horizon like a slow, deliberate lantern being lifted by unseen hands. Elias Carter noticed its brightness the moment he stepped outside. It cast the tall grass in silver waves, turning every blade into a shimmering ribbon. The air felt different, full, holding its breath, waiting. For days now, the whispers had grown stronger, voices braided into the wind, shaping sounds that nearly resembled words. Sometimes they called his name, sometimes they hummed melodies too old to belong to any living tongue. Tonight, the whispers were sharper, pointed, calling with purpose. Elias set down the bucket he had been carrying and stood completely still. His breath rose in thin white trails in the chilled air. The wind approached from the east, not rushing, not soft, moving as if with intention. It wrapped around him in a smooth spiral. Elias. Not loud, not human, but filled with meaning. He swallowed slowly. I'm listening, he whispered to the night. The wind answered with a gentle push, not forward, not backward, but toward the open plains behind his cabin. A direction, a summons. The exact way the guide's presence had once led him toward the Valley of Stones. The grass leaned with the wind's movement, bending in a subtle, shifting line, almost like a path beginning to form. Elias's pulse hammered, You want me to follow?" The breeze tightened around him, a warm swirl of air, almost like a nod. He took a slow breath, stepped off his porch, and let the wind guide him. Into the silver plains. The night was almost unnaturally bright. The moonlight spilled across the prairie as though the land itself were reflecting light back into the sky. Every detail stood visible: the distant cottonwoods, the gentle dips of the earth, the ripples of tall grass shifting like a silver ocean. The wind moved just ahead of Elias, not pulling, not pushing, but leading, the way a lantern lights a path without touching the feet that walk it. He walked quietly, boots brushing the cool grass. The only sounds were the steady hush of the wind and the periodic whispering that slid between the blades. Elias kept his voice low. "What are you trying to show me?" The wind brushed his coat in response, warm, patient, ancient. The whisper swelled, and this time he heard more than his name. He heard tone, he heard rhythm, he heard the shape of an idea forming in the air. The old way. Elias stopped, heart catching. The old way? The wind continued onward, the grass swaying in the same direction like thousands of small hands gesturing, "Come." He followed, each step deeper into the moonlit plains. The land that remembers footsteps. After nearly an hour of walking, the landscape shifted. The grass grew shorter in places, pressed down in faint patterns, marks too subtle to be paths and too deliberate to be random. Elias knelt. The soil here was different, packed tightly, smoother, like earth once shaped by many feet long ago. He pressed his palm against the ground. "I feel something." A light breeze curled around his fingers, as if acknowledging the truth. Elias closed his eyes. He felt a heaviness, not oppressive, but meaningful. A weight of memory, a residue of people who had walked this land long before the settlers came. Migrating tribes, families moving with the seasons. People who lived in harmony with the wind's voice. Their footsteps lingered in the ground even after centuries, not in prints, but in presence. Elias whispered into the cooled earth, "This is a trail, isn't it?" The wind exhaled, slow, warm, reverent. "Yes." The whisper brushed his ear more clearly this time. "Old trail." Elias shivered, not from cold, but from the sensation of standing on history that refused to fade. He stood and scanned the plains around him. At first glance, the land looked the same as always, rolling waves of tall grass stretching endlessly in every direction. But then the wind shifted. It brushed through the grass in a long, sweeping arc, bending the blades in one direction. A line appeared, subtle but unmistakable, a thin path where the grass leaned differently than the surrounding field. A forgotten trail, hidden by day, revealed only by moonlight and wind. Elias's breath hitched. "How long have you been waiting to show me this?"
The uneasy silence of the trail. The hidden trail looked different in daylight, less mystical, more real. The grass was shorter and a narrow drifting line. There were faint depressions in the soil, barely visible unless one knew exactly where to look. The night before, moonlight and wind had carved it sharp and luminous. Now it appeared like a memory half erased. Elias knelt and touched the earth. The soil was cool and compact. When he pressed, he felt something rigid beneath the surface. A stone? A root? A buried tool? The wind stirred suddenly, one quick swirl over his shoulder. Elias froze. The grass shifted in a tight circular motion, a warning, or a signal. He pressed deeper. His fingertips brushed something carved. Slowly he dug with both hands, moving soil aside until the object emerged fully. A stone. A smooth, dark, river-worn stone etched with symbols, circles, lines, an inverted shape standing alone. Elias's breath caught. The markings were nearly identical to the ones he'd seen on the guidestones and the settlers' journals, but this one had something the others did not. A crack. A deep, intentional slash carved across the symbols, as if someone long ago had tried to destroy the meaning it once held. What happened here? Elias whispered. The wind curled around him, tight, uneasy. Not afraid, but mourning. Tonight, all is revealed. A violent pulse of air struck the porch railing, rattling it. Elias grabbed his lantern, tightened his coat, and stepped forward. The storm rumbling in the distance began to roll closer. The riders return. He had barely made it past the edge of his property when he saw them. 3 riders. The same men who had threatened him days before. Only this time, they weren't hiding on the ridge. They were riding straight toward him, hard, fast, dust billowing behind them. Elias felt the prairie stiffen beneath his boots. He kept walking, slow, even, unwavering. The riders reined in their horses just feet away. The leader leaned forward, jaw clenched. "You didn't take our advice. We told you to quit digging." Elias said nothing. He held the lantern calmly at his side. The man spat into the dirt. "We heard you've been out there again, digging up things that ain't your concern." Elias's gaze hardened. "They're everyone's concern," he said quietly. The man's nostrils flared. "You're one man, Carter. One stubborn fool with no family, no backing, no place to go if things go sideways." Elias didn't blink. "I'm not alone." The man snorted. "You got ghosts backing you now?" Elias didn't answer. But the wind did. A sudden gust slammed into the riders from behind, almost knocking one from his saddle. The horses shrieked and stamped, eyes wide and rolling with fear. "What the? Hold her steady! What's happening?" The wind howled, not wild, but intentional. A warning. The lead rider steadied his horse long enough to glare at Elias. "This ain't over," he spat. "If you walk out there tonight, you won't be coming back." Elias stepped forward, voice calm as stone. "If I don't go," he said softly, "then no one will ever tell the truth." The rider's expression clipped into fury. He yanked his reins and turned sharply. "Then I hope the ghosts take you," he snarled. He rode off. The others followed. Elias didn't watch them go. He only turned east, toward the shifting storm, toward the humming valley, toward the truth that called his name. The storm awakens. By the time Elias reached the deeper plains, the storm had begun to form. Dark clouds rolled in like a massive wall, stretching across the horizon. Lightning flickered inside them, silent for now, building strength. The wind screamed suddenly, rushing past Elias in great waves, pushing him, urging him forward. He braced against it. "Is it happening now?" The voice slid through the storm, layered, ancient. "Tonight, the truth walks." Lightning cracked in the distance, a long, jagged tear across the sky, and thunder followed seconds later, rattling the ground beneath his boots. The tall grass was no longer silver and still. It thrashed wildly, bending low then whipping upright, as if reacting to some invisible presence crossing through it. Elias shielded his face. The wind pushed through the wind. Hurry! He moved faster. The Valley of Stones. When Elias reached the valley, the storm was almost overhead, swirling like a great dark crown. The cottonwood tree stood tall and shadowed, its branches bending violently in the wind, but refusing to break. Elias stumbled down the slope into the circle of stones. The moment he crossed into the ring, everything stopped. The wind stilled. The grass froze. The storm paused mid-rumble. A silence heavy as earth settled around him. Then, a figure formed beside the tree, shimmering, tall, human-shaped, but not human. The guide. Elias's breath caught. "You?" he whispered. The guide stepped forward, or appeared to. His form wavered like light reflected in water, but his presence was unmistakable. His voice came not through air, but through bone and memory. "Elias, this is the night." Thunder boomed overhead. The storm resumed, roaring, cracking, shaking the valley, but inside the circle of stones, there was only calm. Elias swallowed hard. "The truth. You've been waiting to show me." The guide nodded, and then the child's voice joined his. "All of it." Lightning struck the hilltop above them. The valley lit white. Elias shielded his eyes. The guide's voice deepened, strengthened by dozens of echoes. "Tonight, you will see what happened here." Elias felt his heart hammering. "What do I have to do?" The wind whispered around him, gentle, guiding. "Stay inside the circle." The storm shrieked. Rain began to fall, sharp, cold, violent, but the circle remained dry, protected, waiting. The guide reached out a shimmering arm. The ground trembled. The stones began to glow faintly. Elias stepped deeper into the circle. The guide spoke. "The truth buried beneath the plains rises now." Lightning split the sky. Thunder tore the air in two. The wind exploded around the valley, and the earth beneath Elias's feet began to move. The storm had broken the night before, tearing open the sky and revealing a truth that had lived too long beneath dust, silence, and forgotten grief. When morning came, the land looked washed clean, as if the plains themselves had shed their sorrow. Elias Carter stood at the edge of the shallow valley, hands stained with the earth he had uncovered. The ancient guide's voice had faded sometime near dawn, softly, peacefully, like a final breath. Clara's whisper had dissolved into the breeze, warm and grateful. The voices were gone, not vanished, fulfilled. They had given him their truth. Now the responsibility was his. Elias looked across the endless expanse of tall grass, glowing gold under the rising sun. A breeze whispered through the blades, brushing gently against his coat. Not a voice this time. Not a warning. Not a call. Just a presence. A quiet thank you. Elias inhaled deeply. "I won't let you be forgotten," he whispered. The wind stirred, circling him once before drifting east, toward the horizon, toward memory. The morning after the storm, Elias walked down into the valley where the stones had glowed last night during the guide's final revelation. They were only stones now, gray, simple, half-buried. But his eyes couldn't unsee what they had shown him. The burned wagons, the broken circle, the desperate migration, the betrayal, the burial of innocence, the attempted erasure of an entire moment in history. The land had carried those memories for more than 100 years, unable to rest until someone heard its story. Elias knelt beside one of the stones. Moisture from the storm glistened on its surface. He brushed his fingertips over it gently. "You held them all this time, and you trusted me." The wind rustled the grass just enough to respond. A soft, warm sound. Approval. He stood slowly. His joints ached, but not unpleasantly. The exhaustion felt earned. Today would be a day of work, but not digging. Today would be for honoring, for protecting, and for beginning something the voices had waited generations for. A visitor at the horizon. Elias had just returned to his cabin when he saw movement at the northern edge of the plains. A single rider approached, moving steadily but without urgency. For a moment his chest tightened. The land barons. His hand instinctively reached for the door, but the wind brushed his arm, calm, gentle. Not a warning. Not danger. Elias squinted. The rider was elderly, thin, wrapped in a patterned blanket, one of the Lakota elders. He dismounted before reaching the cabin and walked slowly, leaning on a carved wooden staff. When he reached Elias, he offered a nod. "You were awake last night," he said softly. Elias smiled faintly, hard not to be. The elder stepped closer. "You have seen what many refused to see, what some tried to bury, what others tried to silence. The land remembers, even when people do not." Elias swallowed. It was overwhelming. "Yes," the elder murmured, "truth often is." He motioned toward the valley. "The guide showed you the story." Elias nodded. The elder lowered his head respectfully. "He chose you. They all chose you." Elias exhaled shakily. "Why me?" "Because you listened," the elder replied simply. "Most hear only wind, but you heard voices, intent, memory. And they heard you too. They knew your heart."
Thanks for watching. If you found this look into history valuable, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one.